top 5 quarterbacks as of right now for the 2023 NFL draft. You got Bryce Young at 1. You got Will Levis at 2. Interested to have a conversation there as CJ Stroud closed that gap a little bit. If you thought flipping it after this Saturday. So Stroud's at 3. Anthony Richardson's at 4. And then your guy Tanner McKee is at number 5. We'll just start with Will Levis. You having him at number 2 overall. Or not number 2 overall, but number 2 in this quarterback rankings. Where's the gap between Levis and Bryce Young? And then where's the gap between Levis and Stroud?
So I think the gap between Levis and Bryce Young is bigger, quite a bit bigger. Like bigger than the gap between Levis and even like Anthony Richardson.
Oh, okay.
Or even like McKee in this class. Like I feel great about Bryce Young. I don't know if you watched the game at all over the weekend, but what he did at Kansas State was just what he's done pretty much over the course of his career. When he's big moments, Bryce Young's been showing up. And obviously it took him not having his top 2 wide receivers in the national championship game to even look like a human against Georgia. But we saw in the SEC championship game that just he dominated what was an NFL defense. That was as good a defense as we've seen in college football over the past handful of years. I think the stat I had in an article the other day was Georgia last season against opposing quarterbacks had a 53.0 passing grade against Georgia last season. Bryce Young had a grade over 90 against Georgia last season. Like he was dominating between those 2 games.
Right.
An NFL caliber defense. And when you do that, now there are going to be things to his profile, obviously the size, that are going to matter at the NFL level. There's a reason why he drops deeper and sits in the back of the pocket more so than, say, a Will Levis does, than an Anthony Richardson does. Like, it is difficult to see over the line when you are at that height. Drew Brees has said he used to take his dropbacks on his toes as high as he could just to get that little extra piece to see the defense when you are dropping back, when you are 6 foot, or maybe even Bryce Young stays smaller than 6 foot quarterback. So it does matter. Will impact his game at the next level. But he is where it impacts your game, where it sort of comes into play is seeing the middle of the field, as I just said with like Drew Brees. Bryce Young is graded out better over the middle of the field than any quarterback in this draft class. Like he has been excellent in that regard. So at that point, at the end of the day, yeah, it might put some limitations on him, but he has other aspects to his game that are just uncoachable. I mean, I think he gives you a floor that's still very, very high.
Yeah, I know. I agree. When you watch Bryce Young and the success that he's had against some of the best defenses in the SEC and the best defense maybe we've seen in college football over the last decade or so in the Georgia Bulldogs last year and even Georgia this year. Really great defense. It performed so well, graded out incredibly well. The success that we see it on the scoreboard, on the stat sheet, and the grading profiles and the advanced stats, like everything. Bryce Young just grades out very, very well in every area other than measurables. But quarterback position is one that is so much between the ears and what you see. And Bryce Young sees that. Feels like better than anybody else. So let's move on then to Levis and Stroud. I want a little bit of a debate here. You talked about this a little, and I'm wondering how much weight you give this past game for CJ Stroud, because CJ Stroud this season under pressure before this past weekend, 38 PFF grade, one of the lowest grades under pressure that we had in the country. This past weekend against Georgia, 82.6. An incredibly high grade under pressure for a quarterback there. How much did last week's game for CJ Stroud go into where he would be on these rankings and what you think of him as a quarterback?
I truthfully think it was huge. It was the best game he's played in his career. Like that was the best tape. That if you're going to point to any for CJ Stroud, it was that. Now there are still aspects of it that, Ohio State's offensive line, the way they scheme up is still very advantageous for quarterbacks. He still is dealing with some of the best talent around him, but when things broke down, when it did get tough, that was the best he's looked at any point in his career, as you alluded to there. Like he was under pressure 19 dropbacks in that game. Was never under pressure more than 12 dropbacks in any other game this season. So like you saw, and 19 dropbacks is like, that's what it's going to look like at times in the NFL. He's going to have to do that. And proving that under pressure against a defense like Georgia, huge for his draft stock. Now, from a tools perspective, yes, he can run, but I don't think he is nimble and elusive in the pocket. Like that's never going to be his game. You get him out in space, sure, he can pick up a first down, but that's never going to be a big part of his game. I still do worry about the arm strength is middling by NFL standards. I think just in the, if you put together the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now, line him up in terms of arm strength, he is below average in that regard. He would be below 16th. He would be somewhere in like the low 20s if you put him on the NFL roster next season, whereas I think Young has a stronger arm. I know Levis has a stronger arm. I know Anthony Richardson has a stronger arm. I think Tanner McKee has a little bit stronger of an arm. So he's, of these top 5 QBs, he probably has the weakest maybe like pure physical skill set, but damn, he's accurate. Damn, he's good from the pocket. And I think he plays the game a lot differently. Like a lot of the concerns we have with Fields that have reared their head in the passing game, I don't necessarily have with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, so we're asking in the chat, would you rather have like Stroud or Levis as your QB2? A lot of people overwhelmingly saying Stroud, but Jason's saying, hey, I like Levis over Stroud due to the higher ceiling, and then Daniel echoed that as well. Stroud feels like the higher floor prospect. Levis feels like the higher ceiling. Is that an arm talent thing, kind of what you were talking about there? Is that the biggest reason?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's a fair descriptor, although I'm not even sure. Floor with a quarterback is always difficult to, I'd say, pinpoint because of how different the game gets played at the collegiate level versus the NFL, and just how different it's going to be for all these guys. So floor is always hard to discern, but I would agree that Levis, his ceiling, his ability as just an athlete is unique, and that's why he gets that spot on the PFF board.
I do want to ask you a little bit about Anthony Richardson and your thoughts overall after watching a couple of games of him. You got him at number 4. He's such a polarizing prospect, right? I think anytime you even throw Richardson's name in a mock draft, you will see both ends of the spectrum about as far as you can. People will say, how in the world could you ever put Anthony Richardson in the first round of a mock draft? And then you'll have other people go, how in the world do you not look at Anthony Richardson and think that he's not going to go higher in a mock draft? So it's like, okay, well, those are extremely different takes. But I think the play, if you're not really examining it, warrants it when people have watched it live. So you watched a lot of Anthony Richardson. What do you think about him right now?
I'm a big fan of Anthony Richardson. Truthfully, if I'm a team drafting at the back end of the top 10, someone like, the Panthers or whatever, the Falcons, where it's, and maybe not necessarily Falcons with Ritter and whatnot, but like someone there who wants a quarterback, and it's the decision is trade up draft capital to go get a Will Levis or a CJ Stroud in the top 5. Jump someone at 3 or 4, or just stand pat. Don't maybe mortgage a future first rounder or a second and a third or whatever it's going to take to go up, and just drafting Anthony Richardson. I think it's close enough that I'm just going to stand pat and draft Anthony Richardson because of how special he is athletically. I mean, he is a sudden athlete for 6'4", 240. He outruns DBs when he gets up to top speed. It really is. And that to me is how high floor. Like that gives you, if you can run the way Anthony Richardson can run, at the very minimum, you will be a big value add. You will be a game changer for the rushing offense to whichever NFL team you go to. So that gives you a little bit of a floor. So from that perspective, he has it. Now, a long way to go, but I think his footwork and his ability to work from the pocket, ability to work under pressure, is a far cry from a guy who probably had a similar strengths and weaknesses profile in Malik Willis last year, where it's like, oh yeah, he's inaccurate, needs to improve necessarily from the pocket, needs to, do more sort of NFL things, shall we say. I think Richardson already does a lot of NFL things and what he's going to be asked to do at the NFL level as a quarterback in the drop back passing game.
Yeah, I think there's less, the way that I put it on the NFL Stock Exchange podcast was there's less imagination with Richardson than there was with Malik Willis. Because I felt like with Malik Willis, you were saying a lot of the same things, like not you personally, we all, a lot of people were saying
the same take.
Same take, where it's like, okay, he's not where he needs to be as a passer yet. He's got to get things cleaned up. He's got to be more comfortable in the pocket, all that kinds of things. And we didn't really see it a ton with Malik Willis. It was kind of like, okay, if you do this, this is what it could look like. Yeah. With Richardson, we've seen what it looks like. We just haven't seen it enough. It's just not consistent. It's not that it doesn't exist. Yeah. It's just not consistent, which is maybe the same points of conversation, but it's a different conversation and a tone of it. So that's what I would say. With
and Richardson, the other thing to keep in mind, redshirt sophomore. Barely over a season played.
Right.
Malik Willis, redshirt senior, played a ton of football already. It's like, that's why it was surprising to me that he came out, because this guy and his ability, if he makes those necessary changes, is a number 1 overall pick type of guy.
Yeah.
That's what you're working with from a tools perspective. But in this class, and maybe he saw next year's draft class too with the guys like Drake May and Caleb Williams, and is like, hey, am I going to jump those guys too? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'm still going to be on the outside looking in. So what's the difference between drafted somewhere in the, maybe 8 to 20 range in this year's draft, which where I believe he will come off the board, rather than the 3 to 5 range if he came back and balled out next year. So
yeah, and I also think, you bring up a great point. He declared you view what the quarterback class could be next year. I don't think Anthony Richardson would have declared for the draft if he got anything less than like a first round grade. I think the NFL Draft Advisory Board or what agents were telling him or whatever were like, hey, you're going to get picked in the first round. Like it's a no-brainer. Someone's going to take you with a top 32 pick. So for a lot of people, we asked in the chat, hey, would you take Anthony Richardson, or do you think Anthony Richardson's going to be a first-round pick? A lot of people were saying no, wouldn't take him that high, but he is going that high, right? TJ said that, and a lot of people agreed with it. But I just think that's the reality of the situation.
And I would take Richardson that high if he said he wanted to be a tight end tomorrow. Like that's the caliber of athlete we're dealing with. Again, like
athletic.
You watch him move. Whatever it is, whatever he's doing, whether it's like moving in the pocket, whether it's running out in space, whether it's eluding a defender, he's a high-end athlete. Like it is, he moves like a Kyle Pitts moves. Kyle Pitts goes top 5 because of that. Now, obviously, there'd be a learning curve to the position, but I think we've seen at something like tight end that it's very athletically based, and Antonio Gates, guys of that nature that just are athletes that end up playing the position can succeed there. So if Anthony Richardson wanted to play tight end, I would draft him in the first round tomorrow.
TJ said Richardson should be a luxury second-round pick, but that's not how GMs think. Well, unfortunately, when you look at a guy with that high of a ceiling and you know that it can mean the entire world for your franchise, sometimes you just don't have that luxury. It's like, are we going to be okay with ourselves if we don't get Anthony Richardson and we just say, but we stuck to our grades on it. And meanwhile, he balls out and maybe becomes a great starter somewhere else in the team. That's just not how it works. So you know that GMs, as TJ said, are going to have to take that risk.
And I think it also, like, if you're saying, you don't want to draft him in the first round, you're kind of ignoring just the historic rate of first-round picks, right? You're at best in the 50% range on first-rounders turning into quality starters for the team. So it's not like you're, if I don't draft Anthony Richardson in the first round, I got a surefire stud.
Right.
It's like you're drafting Anthony Richardson in the first round.
It's a risk no matter what.
Because, exactly.
It's a risk no matter what. And so
none of these guys say,
if you need one, you'd rather take the risk on the position that if it hits at the highest level with a high ceiling, could mean all the difference in the world, right? So you've got Tanner McKee at 5. You don't have to go too much into Tanner McKee, but I basically wanted to ask you, you've got these 5 guys here. Is the quarterback class really that deep after this? We've got Hendon Hooker in this class, like a Jake Haener's in this class, like a Jaron Hall could be in this class, right? Like you've got those kinds of guys, but is anyone really moving the needle after these top 5s? Bo Nix is going back to school, so he's not in this one. We thought he might be, but
it would not surprise me after this top 5 if we did not see another quarterback until day 3. And unfortunate for Hendon Hooker because he looked great this season, has made massive strides, but you are getting a 25-year-old rookie with a torn ACL if you draft a Hendon Hooker. That's just a bad starting point. I don't care who you are. And it's not like his game was slam dunk top 10 pick either. It was like, he's had a nice year, like fringe top 50 sort of guy on most people's boards because of that Tennessee offense being so gimmicky and what he's asked to do there. So, Hendon Hooker, QB6 here in this class. Obviously, because you said Bo Nix comes back to school, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's not even a top 100 pick.